I think the panelists that we have today are really amazing thought leaders in their own kind of different and unique ways. And I've had a lot of fun working with them over the years. So really looking forward to seeing what comes out of our conversation. Just to kind of kick things off before we get into some of the questions we're going to dive into, I wanted to set the stage as it relates to open innovation. So back in 2003, a Berkeley professor named Henry Chesborough, who's really one of the kind of godfathers of open innovation, coined the term with this definition. He said, open innovation is the use of purposive inflows and outflows of knowledge to accelerate internal innovation and expand the markets for external use of innovation. Now, to me, that's like a little too academic for my brain. And so maybe thinking of it a different way, when you think of open innovation, it's kind of the opposite of the historical corporate practices where secretive R&D labs were created to think up and create new products, which would then be sold by companies. Open innovation is really about companies being able to leverage a disparate network of both internal and external problem solvers to be able to come up with ideas and solutions and be able to then bring those solutions to market. And as McLean mentioned, as a founder and former CEO of MindSumo, I've had the good fortune of being able to see firsthand how companies can benefit from leveraging the power of a crowd to drive innovative practices, to drive new products, and open innovation, how it can really be used as a tool that can benefit companies in many different ways. And I've also seen how this model can help companies from a talent perspective as well. I'm really glad that we can have Miles on the phone to talk about that a little bit as well, just because we know that the way companies hire, the way companies do work is changing. And I think open innovation really taps into that as well. So hopefully we'll be able to build that into the conversation. And before we kind of kick off with our first question, I think it's important to note also how this past year has changed kind of the way companies are looking at open innovation, with COVID being something which has completely disrupted us, taken away the ability to have that sense of water cooler innovation where people in a physical office are able to gather and brainstorm and ideate. And for that reason, I think it really kind of puts a brighter light on open innovation in general and has to make companies think hard about how they both need to and how they can implement this kind of a strategy into their corporate practices. And so I'm gonna not get long-winded here and want to dive into the questions and let our panelists chime in because they're the real experts. So first off, John, I want to start with a question directed towards you.
Okay.
Earlier this summer, there was a great article that came out from Harvard Business Review, and the title was "Why Now is the Time for Open Innovation?" And so I would love to just kind of get your commentary on why you believe now is the time for open innovation and why you agree with that and how you've seen that playing out.
That's a great question. As I've contemplated this, I mean, a lot of us have had conversations around, that, and I think it's a fact that, COVID's just accelerated, all the remote work, and hence with the remote work, it's given us the ability to think about new employment models, right? So looking outside the walls of a company. But I think what we're entering into now is really, if last year was the year of COVID, this year is the year of immunity. And as much of us, I think all of us want to be out of the, this tunnel. We can see the light at the end of the tunnel, but it's still a long ways away. And so my sense is that if we look back a decade, right, that really accelerated this whole movement was the really Great Recession. I think what's happening now is it's the great restructuring, right? That's what needs to happen. And I think that the number one goal for companies need to be to address and really understand the fragility of the systems, really, applying systems thinking. And a part of that is as we look at, reducing that fragility, how do we build that resiliency? And I would suggest that one of the ways to build that resiliency is to really help move costs from a fixed cost base in your company to a variable cost base. I think one of the really important ways to do that is to use platforms like MBO to make sure that you're connecting with the very best talent in a very frictionless or at least reduced friction way to ensure that when you taskify the work and that you understand what work needs to get done, the very best talent's participating and make that happen. So from a very high level, that's what I would say is that in this age of the great restructuring that we really got to, be more resilient.
For sure. Yeah. Either of the rest of you want to chime in on that before we move on to another question?
Yeah. Hey, it's Miles. I'll jump in on this. John, I like the way you framed, coming from from COVID into, immunity stage and the great restructuring. I think it's a good framing for what I would say I've experienced and seen over the last year is obviously people's worlds have been rocked in terms of the way that they work. And it's become the everything at home lifestyle now, which means, your family's better for good or worse, for good or better, right? But I think there is an element when it comes to collaboration, teamwork, innovation, that an open innovation capability plays a really important role in. And what I mean by that is people have become effectively isolated. While you may be sitting on Zoom meetings like this all day long, there's an element of physical isolation, and physical isolation can have an adverse effect on people's well-being. And so when I look at what we're doing, it's obviously open innovation is to great ideation, bring in diversity of thought, diversity of capability. But I think companies need to focus on, it gives people passion and purpose to do things together, to ideate and engage. And open innovation is such an easy way to do that when we're embedded in a remote work structure that for most of us, I think people feel is out of their control right now. We don't really know when we're going to be able to be back in more physical human interaction. So doing things together that are seeing the possible is good for the health of a company and the well-being of individuals. So that I see it as a much bigger purpose than just getting the next best idea.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. Yeah, I think those are both really great points. Balaji, I want to kick this next question over to you. And, I've always been really impressed with how Deloitte has approached open innovation, and specifically your group, Deloitte Pixel. Having started and working at a company where I am constantly trying to kind of sell companies on the vision of open innovation and how it can be a value add to them. One thing that I've noticed, and I'm sure you've noticed as well, is that a lot of companies like to dip their toes into the open innovation pool, maybe test it out, do an experiment here or there, run a project here or there. But I think the list is much, much shorter when we talk about companies that have really embraced it as an integral part of their strategy and a fundamental part of their future success. And so, your perspective coming from a company which really I think has done more to try to embrace that, why do you think it is the case that maybe open innovation hasn't caught on with other companies that are more hesitant to really dive in head first? And what do you think can be done about that to try to change perceptions and change that way of thinking?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Keaton, and we've discussed that in the past as well. I mean, I think of fundamentally innovation as the process of creating something of value from uncertainty and lack of clarity. And so you're going after a completely new product, solving new customer needs where there's a ton of uncertainty and lack of knowledge into a new space that you're going. And when you're doing that, what teams tend to do also is, what is the one thing that I can control is the process and the team around me, right? So, and that is the reason if you see a lot of innovation teams, they tend to be people coming from the core of the company, bringing their understanding, their teams and their expertise, and also work processes of how they delivered other work in the past within the company, coming to run innovation within the company. And because open innovation or using open tools was not a core part of running a mainstream business, when they move into innovation, they do not bring in that skill set or tool set or quivers, arrows in that quiver to say, okay, now let's go look at a new tool. And then they're like, I'm already going after an uncertain problem. Now I'm also using an uncertain or an unclear or new to me approach to get there. And it compounds their discomfort. So, and when you compound that discomfort, what you do is you go back to the things that you're most confident about, which is your team, your structure, your process, your traditional market research, your traditional interviews. And as such, it becomes a vicious cycle that you're trying to do something uncertain, but you're going back to a certain set of processes. So it's a very organizational behavior approach to just thinking about why a lot of new innovation teams tend to do the similar things, because it's just human behavior. How do you solve that? And I think there are two two sides to that equation. One is open innovation companies and tools have to make the process of using them a lot more easier to connect to the current state of what companies work. What I see is a lot of times they're like, okay, we're going to be far away and you need to come to us to use us the way we are. Whereas the companies are like, I want you to be here where I am. And I think that somewhere in the middle is where we need to meet, so that there is some sense of comfort that I know what I'm doing, but I'm also doing something new. And I think, and many times it's a question of timing. Companies like yours, there are many companies around open innovation, companies like Topcoder, HeroX, XPRIZE, all of them are trying to figure out how to bring this nebulous concept closer to the organization. How do we integrate it into the processes of a company? How do you integrate it into an enterprise ERP system? Because companies are run on a set of infrastructure these days. And when we say, okay, I'm going to use something outside of that, that is like, how do you connect into the financial systems? How do you connect into the procurement systems? How do you connect into the marketing systems? So there's like teams feel that I need to spend a lot more time to make this work than something that's already integrated. So I think an ability for companies to really think about, open innovation companies to think about, how do I integrate into the processes? And for companies at the same time also to push for, if I want to go build a product that is not core to us, I need to be comfortable with some uncertainty in the process as well.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And it's been interesting for me, now that MindSumo is part of MBO, seeing, because I think MBO has done a really good job of building themselves into some of those core processes for MBO's historic core offerings, and really kind of taking some of the, some of the pain out of that. And that has gotten me thinking, how can that apply to open innovation as well? So I think that's a great point. Anything that either of the other panelists want to add before we move on to the next question, though?
Yeah, I mean, just to add, Balaji, we just did for those in the audience that are interested, HBS just did a great case study on, I helped write it with Mike Tushman, on Balaji and Deloitte Pixel. And I think it's really worth reading, and the kind of the struggle and the journey that they gone through. But I think one of the things that's happened in the marketplace overall, and I've been in this since 2002 and been intrigued by why it's taking so long for this to catch up, right? And I think the people in the market have spent too much time, I'm guilty of it for sure, of talking about the how, right? It's like, here's how we do it. Here's what we do. We forget about the why, right? The why is really the great restructuring and the, decreasing fragility and increasing resilience. But the what is like creating a new structure that allows that to happen, right? And I think in that creating the new structure, what Balaji's been able to do really, really well at Deloitte is really focus on reducing friction for people, right? Inside his organization to focus on, hey, I can get you a data scientist way faster with a new way to be able to deliver that service to your client. And I think that mindset, instead of thinking about how we do it and trying to sell the how, people get caught up in like, what's the IP? What's the compliance? Is that going to threaten my current, team? Instead of that, it's like, hey, how do we help reduce the friction? How do we take that cost from fixed cost to variable cost, right? And help everybody out.
Yeah, part of the reason at MBO why we brought MindSumo as part of our offer is I view what we're doing is knocking down the friction between all of the points of light of humans on the earth and what enterprises need. It's kind of interesting, right? If you talk to any CEO, he or she will tell you that their most valuable asset is their people. But the reality is no individual company on its own can have access to all of the best people in the world and the best thoughts and minds. So having an open innovation platform capability, whether it's Pixel or what we're doing at MBO, opening that up so that you can get a much, much more heterogeneous set of thought. You had just mentioned a minute ago, Balaji, that people will have a tendency to retreat back to kind of their team and who they know. Another way to say that is they started trying to get heterogeneous insights and diversity of thought, but when it gets uncomfortable, there's a human reaction to retreat and go homogeneous again. And then that starts to kill the innovation. And so I think for people in the audience that are trying to drive this is you have to keep your eye on the prize of the why, which is diversity of thought, innovation. Because the other thing that we know that doesn't get talked about a lot, the most demonstrable impacts on society occur when innovations converge. So AI is invented in 1959 means nothing for 30 years. And then we got electronic dark pool trading. And now we got AI in our consumer life, but it's because of micro technologies. It's all the other innovations that came along, right? And so we carry billion-dollar computers in our hand today. Same thing on the genome. 2000 cost us 100 million to decode the genome. We can get it done for $1,000 today. That's because of open innovation has made it possible for great ideas to converge and create demonstrable effects on society. And the companies that grasp that why are the ones that are going to make demonstrable difference from a future success perspective.
Yeah,
that's a great point, Miles. I really think you're right on there.
Yeah, and I like what you guys were talking about as it relates to, it's the companies that are kind of willing to push through that uncomfortableness that Balaji mentioned, the companies that are willing to, even if the first attempt doesn't go the way they wanted to recognize that this isn't a one-time, problem solved thing with open innovation. It's iterative. It has to be repeated. And the more you do it, the better you get. Interestingly, I think the last time I was with Balaji and John in person was at a kind of a big open innovation conference, which was at Harvard Business School. And one of the things that I heard in the presentation there, someone was presenting some data about just corporate open innovation practices and how basically the more a company sticks with open innovation, the more a company implements it and is willing to kind of stay disciplined in that strategy, just each and every single round, it gets better and better. The results get better, the quality gets better. It's just like any skill that you learn, the first time you try to ride a bike, you're going to fall down, but the more you do it and the more you can stick to that discipline, the better you're going to get. So really like those points. John, I want to throw it back over to you. We were talking about COVID a little bit earlier, and I think that you have kind of a unique position on this panel just because with Open Assembly, you have such a great, broad view of the market as it relates to open innovation. You're constantly talking to, a lot of the leaders of these open innovation companies, and you really have your finger on the pulse. And so I'm curious, in the conversations you've been having with the people who are part of Open Assembly and the different meetings that you guys have been conducting, how have you seen COVID really impact, companies' general perceptions of open innovation? Have you seen that uptick in interest in people recognizing that they need to take this more seriously because of, how we find ourselves in this forced remote environment where you can't necessarily rely on being together with everyone in the same room to talk things out?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it speaks to the OA journey, right? In that meeting that we had at Harvard, it was really Balaji and Diane Finkhausen and Steve Rader from NASA and I got together and said, oh my God, we're like lost, siblings. Like, where have we been? And we started having conversations as the four of us, right, Balaji? It was super fun, but it was like once a month we get together and talk. And then we started saying, well, let's invite a few more people into the conversation. And it ballooned to 25 or 30 with, Zurich and Wellmark and Anna Darko and a bunch of other great folks on the demand side. And then a lot of the platforms. And that was really robust. And then John Healy from Kelly, who's the head of innovation, said, as COVID started, he said, it's great we're doing this once a month, but what happens if we make it open and let's just do it once a week? And since then, about 2,000 people have joined globally, from everybody from the, head of procurement from Novartis to, the head of future of work from Prudential. It's been an unbelievable conversation. And one of the things that Balaji was so inspirational early, I think it was in July, there was a real push to say, okay, it's great to have these conversations, but what are we going to do about it? And so the community decided to form a nonprofit called the Center for the Transformation of Work. The idea for the Center for Transformation of Work is to transform work for 1 billion people by 2025. And what I love about this is it's not a singular person or a singular point of view. It's really been born out of this collective. It's really been kind of this idea of let's just all try to identify what needs to happen in the context of COVID, in the context of everything else that's going on. And let's just start putting the pieces together. And Balaji, you can comment on it too, but it's been amazing, the community that's come together and tried to solve problems and come up with new solutions. it's really fun. And I think that's the spirit of what we need to do overall to overcome these huge challenges like COVID and like the economic crisis that we're in right now. Is like no one single person or one single company can overcome those things. But if we come together and we're transparent and we're thoughtful and we're willing to share, there's so much momentum we can get if we can just get aligned around these things.
Yeah, I'd add two things to that. I think one is when I started participating in this ecosystem, the open ecosystem, I found it incredibly closed. Most companies didn't even know that there are such like companies that existed, you know, in a different state, in a different business. So while they were focused on their niche, they weren't learning from other people who were trying to solve similar problems. And it had to be a crowd of crowds where unless all of these people talk with each other, the ecosystem and the market will not grow together. Like we see our technology companies, the AWSs and Googles and Azure compete as hell, but they also know that when they want a senior machine learning engineer, they'll always look to their competitor because there's also that perspective. They know exactly what everybody is working on because it just rotates, the people just rotate among these people. Whereas open innovation seemed a lot more siloed. So at least when we started talking to John, one way is we need some kind of neutral party that everybody can come and talk to each other so that we can all elevate the market. But I think going back to your original question, Keaton, what I see as the biggest impact of COVID, I don't see net new ideas that in terms of ideas that are being implemented post-COVID. These are always those ideas that were simmering, that didn't really have a business case, that didn't really get up to the CEO's attention. Like for us as a company, let's reduce our travel budget. It was always on the back burner somewhere that we always wanted to solve. With COVID, we're like, now we can solve it. And I think it's the question of how do we use this crisis as a way to bring up a bunch of things that were issues or barriers in the past and use this crisis as a way to solve them. And an open innovation is one of those things that I think has gotten a boost because of COVID. It's just that I think there's a 10x boost that is left for it to achieve till we all get back onto flights and planes and trains.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, and I've actually seen that play out with some of the companies that use MindSim. You know, people we've talked to in the past who have said, "Well, this could be an interesting project to pose to a crowdsourced community, but we're not really interested right now." And then COVID hit, and we've had people reach back out and say, "This actually is a lot more relevant now. We need to find out some of the answers and solutions to these things we were kind of just thinking about in the back of our minds before." So I completely agree with that. This next question, really, Miles and Balaji, I'm interested in both of your takes on this. So McKinsey recently released a report with this quote in it. It says, quote, "Future-ready companies recognize that purpose helps attract people to join an organization, remain there, and thrive." And so when we think about kind of the juxtaposition between companies adopting and embracing open innovation, but also needing to remember this type of a quote where there has to be kind of a purpose and a culture within their organization, is it possible to help imbue the communities that you work with from an open innovation or an open talent standpoint with that same sense of either purpose or mission or culture, even if they're not, your full-time employees? Is there an element of trying to bring those kind of corporate culture practices, which are so important, to more of an open talent strategy?
Yeah, I'm happy to start, Balaji, but I think there's no question. I think the McKinsey article, with all due respect to McKinsey, is creating some cause and effect that is theory, not empirical. People want to pursue a purpose and be with a purpose-driven company. That's different than I want to be a full-time hostage employee for the rest of my life. And this is actually one of the issues companies need to get over. It's what I was alluding to earlier, is you want people who have a passion and a drive to get behind the purpose of a company. And the purpose can't just be the words. It has to be what you're actually pursuing as a company. And when you find these independents, the extended workforce, if you will, people that are choosing a lifestyle that's different than a W-2 payroll structure, I find most of them have as much or more passion than people that choose to be employees, because they've chosen that they're going to do the work they love, when they want it, where they want it. And what we're doing for companies is helping knock down the friction of making that possible. It's really hard for an individual to go plug in on a one-off basis and be compliant with company rules, state rules, compliance rules. And so by knocking those frictions down and making it easier to do that, you actually get access to a better, richer, stronger talent pool that can help push this heterogeneous commentary I was talking about earlier. It's not just about, everyone says, I'm going to have a diverse and inclusive workforce. They hire them, they train them, and try to make them all act the same way. It's the hugest mistake a company can make.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Balaji.
100% with you. 100% with you, Miles. And I think I'm going to make a few controversial statements, given that I'm representing myself, and I'm going to say sorry to Deloitte later. I do think that a lot of this purpose conversation is coming from the fact that companies have not recognized future of work, and they're still trying to push you need to join me as an employee because I have a purpose. It feels a lot of like companies are thrashing around to find their own purpose as a value proposition to a skilled individual to say, you need to choose me as an employer, as first choose employment as a concept, and then choose me as an employer. And purpose is my reason to tell you that you should, right? I mean, the best example out there that has done the best work where you can communicate purpose, you can communicate engagement, affinity, comfort, and belonging is NASA, where you have a very small team of people. They probably use have the best infrastructure for open innovation anywhere, and they're harnessing the energy of kids that grew up with pictures of moons and planets in their rooms. And now they're harnessing that purpose to say, I don't have enough budget, but I still want to maintain my work. So I could be a freelancer sitting in Indonesia, competing on a robotics arm competition. They don't need to feel like an employment contract is the way to contribute to NASA's purpose. We have to move away from that employment contract is the only means in which I can participate in your purpose, which is, given the trends of future of work that we are seeing, it's an increasingly smaller pool of people. We're spending an insane amount of time going after that versus communicating better to the rest of the people that want to focus on the problems you're looking to solve versus the brand that you want to communicate to everybody else. And I think that mind shift, till they get to that mind shift, companies will keep scratching around to find different ways of attracting full-time employees to them with all of these new marketing stories about purpose and everything else. Whereas you're saying, I don't want to communicate the same purpose so if you don't want to sign the dotted line with me, which is very incongruous in many ways.
This reminds me so much of I was, in the advertising business a long time ago, and the confusion of meanings of words. And one creative was presenting to a huge global client, and they wanted to say zeitgeist, but instead they used the term Schadenfreude. And, the idea that, you want to take pain out of somebody else's, suffering. And so, it feels to me that that's really relevant to purpose, right? Purpose, as Balaji describes, like companies are trying to attract a smaller and smaller pool of full-time employees. I think, Miles, you said something super important here, and that is that, passion is really the kind of the interplay with purpose, right? And so if you look at kind of employment, I believe on a diffusion curve, really, you've got kind of the folks that we're talking about, the open people playing in the open market on platforms like MBO, right? They're at the head of the curve. They're the learners. They're people that are changing the world. They're the early adopters and innovators. The problem is, in a classic Jeffrey Moore sense, that there's a gap there, and that to me is the passion gap. The problem is you get beyond the passion gap, and really most corporations today are passion deserts. They've really sucked the passion out through deep processes to to make people's jobs and lives really difficult. Like I've got to get $50 approved. I can't go on vacation without a, referral. I can't, do anything. And I think part of this is that we're going from a world of push where many company leaders felt like they had a compliant organization and staff that they could push their needs down the chain to get things done, to really a pull, right? And if you're going to be a pull, you have to reframe purpose to not just be for internal employees, but be a purpose that's going to attract amazing freelance talent from the front of that passion curve, so that you can reinfuse passion into the organization. My sense is the best way to get companies to be more passionate, especially in this time of COVID when everybody's so nervous, is through using platforms like MBO, right? I mean, you've got super passionate people on that platform that can re-energize a group of people really quickly as they engage with them. And I think that's a really critical part of this. Yeah, but I want to add something, John, which has been a pet peeve of mine for a while, right? I mean, I am an employee, right? So, and I'm a very proud employee of my firm. But I think the firms and companies have to fight the notion that somebody who signs an employment contract immediately becomes more passionate, more trustworthy, right, better skilled, right, than somebody who chooses to work with them on a project. And the predominant notion that person who did not choose to work with them is less skilled, less trustworthy, and as such has to be treated like a second-class citizen. I totally agree. There are tons of examples, and unless that balance changes, companies will not attract the best talent out there. And I think the companies who actually do start making this balance a little, this dichotomy between full-time and their open talent resources less clear, I think they'll attract the best talent and be more competitive in the marketplace. So there's a mindset issue that significantly has to be addressed. Yeah, I love that. I mean, it really reminds me, my wife and I were having some issues having kids. So we adopted some kids from Russia, and, I was very, very nervous about it. And, wanted somebody that was, doing some counseling with us said, who do you love the most? And I'm like, well, my wife. And they were like, well, you don't have the same blood as your wife. Like, it's not this bloodline thing. You got to change your mindset. And I think the same way here, right? It's like, you got to change your mindset to the people we love the most are our employees. It's like, who are the people that are going to help us get to where we want to go as an organization, right? Who are the people that are going to buy into our culture and be passionate about what we do and really push the ball down the road? And I think that's what we have to see. And I totally agree, Balaji. I think that's the mindset that needs to shift.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Maybe a follow-up question to that, because I've definitely seen that, both from a professional standpoint, but also, it's just one of those things that kind of, when you say it, you understand the truthfulness of that. You're like, oh yeah, people do that. So what are the solutions to try to fix that? Is that through better, better marketing from the companies that are trying to prove that wrong? Is that coming from, thought leaders? Kind of what do you see as the solution to try to overcome that obstacle when we think about how it is kind of embedded and entrenched in a lot of corporate cultures nowadays?
I mean, I think so much, from my perspective, there's been, in the work that I've done a long time, those of us that have been on the front of the curve in the innovation, doing innovative things, we tend to, have some arrogance and say, oh, the old way doesn't work. It's the new way. Right. And that's really a bad thing. When I was at Havas, that was really a bad thing. Right. And my sense is that, I mean, I'm working on a new book with Kareem Lakhani and Jin Pike, who's who runs the Center for, the LISH, the Laboratory for Innovation Sciences at Harvard. And we're really thinking about it in the context of a networked organization. So if you think about NASA, there's two mindsets, right? You could take NASA and say it's 17,000 employees that are really amazing and, world-class at creating innovation, or, which is really more true, NASA is a networked organization that has 17,000 employees that are digitally connected through their NASA at Work internal platform. Then that's another 30,000 employees. And then those folks are all connected through COSI, the Center of Excellence of Collaborative Innovation, to 110 million people through 40 platforms. So really NASA is a community, an ecosystem, or a network of 110,047,000 people that are all passionate about doing work for NASA. And it seems to me if we can build these new models, right, and describe it in a way to say, which you'd rather have, 17,000 people that come to work every day, or 110,047,000 people that are going to be able to lean in to do the things you want to do from anywhere, anytime, at the best in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it goes back to what we were discussing before is, there's a big difference between passion and, kind of company purpose, because, for companies to start to understand that, just because you hire someone full time doesn't mean they have that passion, and understand that, hey, if you go look at the independent workforce, if you go look at more of an open model, you can find those people who have the passion to work on the problems your company is trying to solve. It just opens you up to such a freer and more exciting opportunity to think, I don't need to be pigeonholed and feel like I need to be forced into hiring a person with an employment contract. I can go out and try to find the talent who not only have the skills, but also maybe from that passion standpoint, fit what we're trying to do. And so I think it's just much more exciting as well for companies who are able to adopt that mindset and that approach.
Could I add one more thing?
Yeah, of course.
I think that's an awesome point. And I think there's some confusion. I think that many companies, historically have tried to reduce passion, right? Like passion seems super scary. You don't want the passion crazy guy going off, on his own tangent. And there's some really great research out of Oxford. They've created a new model called the dual model of passion. And they've described it as there's obsessive passion, which is the, crazy entrepreneurial guy that's going to break away and do his own thing. And then the harmonious passion. And one of the things that they've described in their research, what I find really fascinating, is that harmonious passion really consists of teams that have harmonious passion. They exhibit four things. One is intrinsic motivation, transformational leadership, cult-like organizational behavior, and task autonomy. And I think those are really, really amazing four things that any organization would want, whether you call it, it's purpose or passion, but those intrinsic values that you talk about, those four things are really great pillars to build any kind of organization. And again, with that last one, task autonomy, it really speaks to the independence of the workforce and the ability to get the best talent involved.
Yeah, one thing I'd add, Keaton, is I think one of the biggest issues with open talent is being that there continues to be no clear owner for it. Does the HR own it? Because HR seems to HR has the FTE flag on. The sourcing and procurement own it, which is like buys pencils and computers for it. And or does a business own it, where they're buying services of individual freelancers or open talent, but it's not really integrated into the total workforce planning or the strategic workforce planning. So it's been like highly distributed ownership, and as such, scale becomes very difficult unless all of these things come together: business, sourcing and procurement, and HR at any point in time. And I do think that HR needs to own all talent versus only full-time talent, because HR not only owns the talent, but they also tend to be the custodians of the mindset within. Which means when they are communicating that if you're using a freelancer, your costs need to be managed, you're doing something wrong, or it's temporary till you find a full-time person, which means you're communicating to the company constantly that this is a stopgap fix. The right solution is an employee, because that's how their metrics are structured. Unless you change that mindset that you need to bring the right resource agnostic of source, could be a full-time employee, could be a freelancer, could be a crowdsourcing challenge, where it is, whether it's profitability, whether it's agility, whatever is the metric, unless it moves towards that, open talent will continue to be a stopgap fix for transactional problem solving, which is not scalable for the company, which is not scalable for the ecosystem.
Yeah, I agree, Balaji. I mean, one of the things I've done since I came to MBO is very focused on, so I would say that you need to have that business head sponsorship for how they think about their total workforce, and then your total talent HR team has to help administer it, but you need that sponsorship from the top that really embraces the extended workforce and the capability set so that it's driven strategically. Otherwise, it does become a transactional exercise, often pushed into procurement. And I understand, procurement does their role, which is, kind of rate and risk fulfillment on a transactional level, which is very different than a business leader that says, if I'm going to win in my market where I'm competing, I need assets, i.e. humans, great thought, et cetera. So it is threading those things together. And that's very much, where from an MBO perspective, what we're doing now is helping companies really connect that unconnected tissue of business strategy to total talent management by leveraging an extended workforce.
Very smart. I love it.
Yeah, I think those are all really good points. Instead of trying to fit that square peg into a round hole by thinking the eventual solution has to be a full-time employee. If you open the toolkit up so much more to whether you solve it through a freelancer or a crowdsourcing project or whatever it is, just allows for that flexibility. But totally agree with Miles that there has to be direction from the top to go out and do this, or else people aren't going to do it on their own. I know that we are running pretty close, and we want to leave a couple of minutes at the end in case there are some questions that McLean has been fielding. But not to get you all into the business of prognostication, but I'm curious, as we think about open innovation, as we think about the future, whether it's future of work, future of open innovation platforms, I'd be curious to get your takes high level on kind of what you see as the big changes and the big opportunities that you think are going to come to pass in the coming years. And that could be 5 years, 10 years, but just kind of how you see this landscape changing in the future. I feel like on this call we've got some of the real experts on this topic, and so I don't feel like it would be I don't feel like it'd be untoward of us to get your guys' opinions, because I think they're pretty well informed.
You want to go first? Yeah, go. Yeah, go.
Yeah. Whoever wants to jump in.
Yeah, and I think what needs to happen to open innovation is what happened to innovation in the last 5 to 10 years. Innovation used to be this cool team that is often running by itself in a corner, very, very similar to the IT team, which is in the basement where you only go there when your password doesn't work. Versus right now, innovation is the cycle of change is so fast that innovation can't be operating by itself anymore. It has to be a part of your agile sprints. It's a part of every day that you're innovating every day, and it's become a lot more closer to core. And I think open innovation also has to get there, that how we get the heterogeneous input that Miles talks about into product development, into work, has to become less of, I need to do something strange and go out and bring something, but it has to become almost like a mainstream approach. You're not exercising, you're not doing something strange and something new and something different, but it's a mainstream work. And I think going back to what Miles said about reducing the friction to do that is probably the most important. I would love to be in a world in the next few years where we actually don't talk about open innovation. I actually see that we don't talk enough about innovation. If you look at what Amazon does on AWS or Google does or Facebook, they don't talk about innovation as much. They just do it. And I think that's what we are talking. When you speak about concepts way too much, you're basically saying there's way too much friction to be solved. So we have to talk about it because it's different and it's not fitting in. Once it fits in, you actually stop talking about it. And that's what I wanted to get to.
Yeah, that's an awesome point.
I love that. I think, it reminds me, I just, I've been doing this podcast for a bit, and I was calling it the future of work. And then then you come to this realization that the future is already here. It's just unevenly distributed. Right. And so I just renamed the podcast Work. And I think that's, at the core, the problem is really, we need alignment, right? We need alignment, and it's incumbent on those people that are in the industry to be really aligned. We need to be aligned philosophically. We need to use the same terms. We need to make that easier to buy for customers, right? And then, and I think one of the issues is not any fault of anybody's. It's just that it's taken so long for this massive trend to happen because it's so big and so explosive that there's not one big player like a Facebook or a Google that sets the terms, right? That sets the structure. So I think that's the first step, that philosophical alignment. The second step is a kind of a kind of framework, of adoption. And one of the things we've talked a lot about, there's some great folks that are kind of joining the movement now from the outsourcing world. And they constantly remind me that, when outsourcing was nascent, everybody was all over the place. Nobody knew how to buy. There wasn't a common theme of adoption. And once the industry got together and started creating common language and common frameworks, it really accelerated. So I think that's that second point. And then I think, I think that we need to get agreement on the compensation, right? How do we compensate people across the globe? How do we create some common themes on workers' rights and taking care of folks in the independent world? I think that's one of the things that impresses me most about what you guys do at MBO. It's really concerned with how folks, live their lives as an independent contractor and help reduce friction for that side, for the supply side of the market. And I think there needs to be more effort for that. But I would say that if we can focus on those three things, that alignment at those three levels, that you'll see a massive acceleration in the next few years. And then you'll see the kind of adoption that Balaji talked about of having folks inside organizations that really have the remit to focus on open talent and open innovation.
Yeah, I agree with that framing from both of you guys. It makes a lot of sense to me. I think there's an impending body of work that needs to be done. And I'll say it's how do I move from org charts to capabilities and outcomes when I think of my organizational model? Because org charts are synonymous with employee-based operating models. And it's more of what I'm getting after is, what are the capability sets you need and the outcomes that you're striving for? And when you do that, if you have a frictionless platform to deliver those resources, then you don't need the org charts the way that you have less dependency on org charts. And I don't think that body of work has quite been tackled yet. So for me, that's what's on my time horizon to help change the future of work.
Yeah, I'm totally with you, Miles. I think the parallel that I always reflect on is open innovation or crowdsourcing and open talent. For me, is like Tesla's trying to sell LiDAR to people. They don't care what's the technology in it. They just want it to go fast. Right. They don't care what fuel cells in it. And we keep, when the ecosystem partners or vendors come and try and sell fuel cells and LiDAR, there's a whole cognitive gap that people need to understand now. Okay, now I need to understand what crowdsourcing is. I need to understand what open innovation is before I use it. And you've lost a lot of people there.
Yeah.
Sell the car, sell the speed, take all the friction to the back end and own it and solve it.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
Love it.
So we've just got one question that's come in here as we head towards the end, which is, how can a company employee help champion open innovation within the organization? Are there tactical steps that those on the phone can do to help push this agenda forward at the internal level as well as at the highest level?
I mean, I love the work that Paul Estes did around gig mindset, right? And I love the way he just approached it of like, if you want to work in a certain situation or use certain set of tools, you got to start just using the tools. And his parallel of just starting to go out and use those tools, the freelance and open innovation and open talent tools personally, is a really inspirational story. And I think it's a real guide to where other people can go to learn and then be able to be a part of the conversation inside the company.
Yeah, I would just chime in. Sorry, go ahead, Miles.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to chime in saying, in the work that we've done at MindSumo with a lot of companies, a lot of times it can start with, a manager who just has a little bit of budget and wants to try something new and is able to take that experience and sell that up the chain and really show why this was a major value add. So it doesn't always have to come from the top. You know, I think that there are a lot of platforms out there, like Balaji mentioned. There are a lot of resources. There are a lot of tools that can be used to kind of try something out. And you know, it doesn't take that much just to be able to dip your toe in, show a success story, and then be able to use that and build off of that success to try to lay a stronger foundation of how this can become better integrated into the company. Obviously, you need to, you know, hopefully you're good at selling that to the higher ups, because you're going to have to get buy-in from those people eventually. But yeah, I think kind of to John's comment about Paul Estes's work, you just have to go out and do it. And if you just do enough searching, there are enough platforms and offerings out there, I think, that it's relatively easy to do that these days.
I was going to say something very similar, which it's more philosophical beyond open innovation. But anytime you want to drive change in a company, start with thyself and do something that creates demand from other people instead of trying to plan the supply for other people. So do something, act in the present to make a difference. So people start saying, well, what the best day is when somebody says, well, why are we not doing that already at scale? You know, you've won the day because you're not selling. You're just acting and making a difference.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I empathize with the person who's asking the question, because unfortunately the problem in large companies is the contracting and sourcing and procurement is not set up. There is no contract for piloting or experimentation. Like if you want to get a $5,000 challenge to go, the process is the same as buying a $500 million piece of work, right? And so an individual at a project manager level wanting to use MindSumo is either forced to say, I'm going to bypass some systems, you know, make friends with some people so that they can sign a contract quickly. But if they want to actually do it the right way, they will, most of the time, 99% of the time, will say this is not worth it for the small problem we're looking to solve. So as an ecosystem of you know, companies that is trying to solve it, we really have to reflect on how do we make that first project super fast without having to follow the process that takes a $50 million project. Without the first project, there ain't no scale. And the first project is painful right now.